Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week I'm going to discuss that Vijay Mallya podcast that dropped on 6th June. Now, who's Vijay Mallya? You know that he's this very flamboyant, well-known industrialist who's been out of the country for the last 9 years and has been labeled Bagoda, fugitive, what have you, because his company, one of his companies, Kingfisher Airlines, went bankrupt and the government was after him. At least that's what he says. He's been singled out. And if you ask me, it's true. In fact, I say that Vijay Mallya is a perfect example of the government scoring a self goal in its attempt to showcase the power of its brand new, then newly minted insolvency and bankruptcy law. This was 2016. We are in 2025. And a lot has happened in these 9 years. The main thing being the government has recovered far more from Vijay Mallya than he owed, including interest. And it's probably the only case where a company has gone for bankruptcy and the recovery has been higher. The entire principal as well as interest. Now, the government says something else, or rather, the bank says something else. We'll come to that one by one. The key point is this flamboyant king of good times, as his Kingfisher tagline was, had bought political clout to the Rajya Sabha seat or honorary doctorate, all his connections across the political spectrum, and the government wanted him to be the example of how tough they were. So they were going to jail him. Some say he had advanced information. He says that he went for a routine business visit, but he informed the finance minister and flew off to the UK. All hell broke loose over here. He never came back. Now, at that time, the action seemed extremely well deserved, and I'm going to explain why. 9 years later, when you don't manage to do anything about it and close a case, things begin to look different after all. It's almost a decade. And what Mr. Mallya has done now, after the recovery has happened, the government has made no declarations, but they've had to say it in various government documents, including the finance minister saying it on the floor of parliament. So Mr. Mallya decided to turn the tables on the government with a curated podcast to an influencer called Raj Shamani, who has a huge following. This was released early in June. The flamboyant liquor baron in this interview casts himself as a regular guy, brought up strictly, a victim of political vendetta, and it's a perfect platform because his young interviewers, disarmingly clueless about Mr. Mallya's many failed businesses or how bank loans and recovery proceedings work, or even anything about business. I suspect that's exactly his audience as well, because they are so thrilled and fawning and have got a new hero. This is the stage that allowed the savvy industrialist to showcase his extravagances as a serious effort at brand building the Kingfisher brand in beer, the airline, and McDowell's number one. He says, I was a brand ambassador, and all this flamboyance, posing with the air staff, posing for the Kingfisher calendar. Hey, that was all to build the brand, and look at the results. Yes, we are. And some have worked, as he mentions McDowell's, the beer. We know what a disaster Kingfisher Airlines was. But let's come to what Mr. Mallya says. He points out that the government has recovered 14,100 crore by selling his assets and shares. This, he displays government records, and most of us have seen the interview with Madam Nirmala Sitharaman. What he owed, he says, was 6,200 crore. So this is nearly 2.5 times. Banks have reacted by saying, hello, there is still interest. He has to pay us 7,000 crore more. I think that's petty and churlish. And it only underscores his charge that he is being selectively targeted. Like I said, he's a fugitive. They asked him about it. He says, yes, I went. He is a permanent resident, first of all, of UK. He is a non-resident Indian since the 80s. And he says he went on a legitimate business visit and hasn't come back because he wasn't assured of a free trial. And of course, his passport got revoked. So when your passport is revoked, you can't fly, can't go anywhere. So Mr. Mallya turned into a poster boy for financial misdeeds, pagoda, chore, whatever he himself names them. He talks about the media, he goes on about it, but every single thing that we have written has been justified by facts and data. And that's what I'm putting out here in this video blog as well. Now, was he the poster boy for financial misdeeds? Yes, because of his flamboyant lifestyle. If you ask me, he clearly assumed that he has the clout, especially with a weak coalition government. We are talking now about 2012. That's when Kingfisher Airlines, many of you may not even remember how profile it was, all red and smart and glamorous. Under the UPA 2, it was bleeding. It was bailed out once already, and he wanted a bailout over and over again. At that time, he was a Rajya Sabha member. And while this airline is in trouble, he had absolutely no problem, or rather, he was mature enough to flaunt an obscenely opulent lifestyle even as his staff was not being paid money. They were in serious distress. His planes were being grounded. Passengers were left across the country suddenly with no flights and no money to buy another ticket, no refunds. The public anger was enormous because contrast these pictures. Here's what's happening to you as a passenger or an employee, and there's this man flaunting his wealth, posing, having parties, and he says, "So what? It's my money." Yes, but it's your company, and you issued a personal guarantee on those loans. Mr. Mallya casts himself as a misunderstood entrepreneur. He blames Kingfisher Airlines collapse on high aviation fuel taxes, rupee depreciation, government's refusal to allow an investment by Etihad Airways. All true. But that's how India's aviation sector has been. In fact, those who suffered more are Indian Airlines and Air India because they were in the public sector. Those who got all kinds of concessions, landing rights, ability to fly abroad with their connections to the then civil aviation minister were in fact Kingfisher Airlines and Jet Airways, both of which have gone bankrupt. And at the time when Mr. Mallya is complaining, remember, Indigo was profitable, is profitable, has become the number one airline, and SpiceJet was also profitable at that time. It's been a bit of trouble just now. Was this known in the public domain? Remember, 2012 is when problems started. The airline staff wasn't being paid. Even before that, as early as 2011, a Canadian equity analysis company called Veritas had sounded the alarm on this airline. In fact, it said it's teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. Its equity was wiped out. It was surviving on state largesse. What is state largesse? Really, largesse by nationalized banks at our cost, the public, because we, the taxpayers, bail out these banks through an infusion of money by the finance minister every budget, right? India's nationalized banks ignored this report, ignored the warning. Scandalously, they converted his debt to equity at inflated prices. It doesn't happen to anyone unless you have tremendous clout. Remember, he's sitting in the Rajya Sabha. And they were preparing to bail him out again. Why? Because we need planes in the sky. We had demand and there were not enough airlines. It's happening all over again today, but this was the exact situation in 2012. That is when people were so outraged that a bunch of concerned citizens, I was also a signatory, wrote a letter to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. The main ones were Aruna Roy, Nikhil Dev, Prashant Bhushan, E.S. Sarma, and many others. We have written about it in Moneylife. You can take a link, you can look at the letter, you can look at the reminder. It offered a counter narrative to what you would hear in the podcast. It said that Mr. Mallya was using scare tactics, such as large-scale flight cancellations, leaving people in the lurch at wherever destination. You've gone in the morning to Delhi, you don't have a return flight, it's been cancelled. He was doing all this to scare the government, saying, where are the airlines? What will people do? And extract concessions. And that is why a bailout was being planned. He had losses of 7,000 crore already after an expensive acquisition of Air Deccan. Why did he do it? Primarily to be able to fly abroad. And why did you need to fly abroad so fast? You can call it competition or you can call it ego, but all of this was funded by nationalized banks. Meanwhile, the airline had defaulted not just on salaries, employee provident fund, contributions, tax deduction at source, deducted and not deposited. This is why the tax authorities froze its accounts. It had to pay service tax, vendor payments, and what have you. Meanwhile, the letter also said that any bailout, if you want to bail it out again in national interest, because you need to have planes in the sky, then it should be contingent on two factors. One, make Mr. Mallya inject at least 4,000 crores from his personal assets, and there should be a complete change in management. It also called for an urgent overhaul of India's aviation policy. India's aviation policy has been a problem ever since liberalization in the 90s. That's not the subject over here, but they said you need tighter licensing so that people with deeper pockets come in here, and you need better safety norms. At that time, Vijay Mallya was not a story of regulatory persecution at all. It was one of regulatory capture, sitting in parliament with all the netas as his friends, cross party lines, a coalition government, and the ability to put pressure. For the record, he did not bring in the money then. He offered to bring it after 2016, sitting from London, at which time a little too late and too little, and the banks refused to take it. Don't ask me why, that's another chapter. Now, what explains Mr. Mallya's hubris? Perhaps his own words offer a clue. All documented and in writing, written at the time he said it. So in 2000, he told a reporter from the Times of India that politicians want, and I'm quoting, liquor money, liquor planes, liquor helicopters, and liquor itself during elections, but they didn't want him in parliament. He fixed that soon enough. Very soon, he was in the Rajya Sabha. And this would have helped not just his liquor business, but all the lobbying for the aviation business. Liquor was his primary need because liquor policies are fragmented across India. Each state has its own rules. And forget about the liquor manufacturers. We have seen the Aam Aadmi Party also get into trouble exactly over liquor policy. Somalia had a private aircraft. It was nicknamed Kingfisher Express. It used to ferry netas to parliament across party lines. This is the friends he had. This is the power he wielded. And who suffered? Like I said, state-owned carriers. Who benefited? Jet Airways, bankrupt. Kingfisher Airlines, bankrupt. Now, in 2016, after his problems happened and he flew abroad when arrest was imminent, he asked, why am I being made the poster boy for bad loans? He says it's a business loss. Yes, but let's come to why this business loss was different. He was seemingly oblivious to the bad optics of donating. So when he was 57, 58, 60, 3 years in a row, 60 was when 2016, the whole collapse happened. He was donating kilos of gold to temples in South India, Tirupati, and one in Dakshin Karnataka. On his 60th birthday, we all have heard about this lavish party that he threw while he was defaulting on employee salaries and taxes. Now, he says there are two separate things. Banks froze my accounts, and that's why I couldn't pay. There was a suicide. No, not really all correct. This was a man who fought a legal battle to pay himself 50 crore for issuing a personal guarantee for Kingfisher loans. This was his personal guarantee and one through UB Holdings of 1600 crore. So in case after case, those of you who have watched my video blog regularly would know that banks do not have the documentation. In fact, they do a forensic audit when there's nothing and they discover the personal guarantees issued by promoters are not worth the paper they're written on. But this man went to court to be paid a guarantee fee, which is why his documentation was perfect. And of course, post 2020, he's a lucky man. The share prices, the values of his companies, his real estate assets, everything soared. The big boom in the stock market, as you know, has happened post 2020, post the COVID pandemic. The number of investors has increased so much. In fact, 9 out of 10 investors in the market today have entered post 2020. All this benefited him. The value of the shares went up, benefited the banks. They could sell and get the money. So while Kingfisher was in trouble, apart from donating gold and throwing parties, Mr. Mallya was also continuing to spend on building the brand. How? by buying IPL players, buying a Formula One team, all, as he says, to promote the Kingfisher brand. The fact is that he even claimed a tax deduction on payments to his socialite wife, ex wife now, as business commission. So every single expense came from the company. This was, of course, disallowed by the Chandigarh Tax Tribunal. But it is only one part of the story. So he's oblivious to what he was doing, how he was spending, having given a personal guarantee. Why blame me? Businesses go bankrupt. You gave a guarantee. He's forgotten about that, not mentioned anywhere in the podcast. Now, like I said, this is only one part of the story. The man is really lucky. The number of times he's made a comeback is extraordinary. So he inherited a business empire in his 20s, went on a mad expansion spree, almost went bankrupt, was involved in FERA violations, and got a lucky break because of economic liberalization. It led to, again, like after 2020, a massive re-rating of his companies, brands, and real estate. This was post 1991. In fact, in 91 and 92, there were cover stories saying, "Is Vijay Mallya broke?" Now, his high stakes dealing seems to mark a pattern of recklessness that accompanied his legal acumen. He's very clever about the law, can go to court, fight things out. He finds legal documents boring, but he reads them. He's also able to create brands, including branding himself. Now, let's go back to the bankruptcy that happened at that time. Like I said, he inherited United Breweries in 1983 after the untimely death of his father, Vijay Mallya. Along with that, he got Kisan Products, UB Petrochemicals, lots of real estate, and a whole bunch of companies are not relevant because they no longer exist. He then embarked on a spree of acquisitions, most of which ended in distress. So he bought Berger Paints. He says he was the chairman. He bought it in 88, sold it in 96 for 250 crore. Yes, he made money on that. Look at the others. Best and Crompton used to be considered on par with Larsen and Toubro, a blue chip engineering company. He bought it in 89, it was mismanaged, went into a decline, and was sold with really nothing in 1995 for a pittance. Mangalore Chemicals and Fertilizers. He got into this business, acquired it in 1990. It was sick by 1994, huge project, and it was ultimately sold to Zuari Industries in 2004 after a one-time settlement to write off 135 crore. Kisan sold to Unilever because that's the time he needed to raise money. He was nearly bankrupt. The story repeats itself business after business because he had dabbled in all kinds of companies. He had set up a pizza chain, maybe to rival Domino's, more upmarket, carbonated water, telecom, healthcare, what have you. He even had a finance company called Crest Finance. All of it was flogged at that time to escape bankruptcy. Now, in the 80s, a lot of takeovers happened in India. So he was involved. This is when we had a draconian FERA law, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, very, very stringent. That time he was involved in a bitter takeover battle with Manu Chabria, called a corporate trader, who was based in Dubai. Manu Chabria bought a clutch of blue chip companies which used to be professionally managed and what the Calcuttans would call the boxwala companies. So Shaw Wallace, Hindustan Oliver, the Gammon India had a takeover issue. These were all professionally managed with no single promoter. They were targeted. There's another called Genelec. Manu Chabria bought most of them, but Vijay Mallya was in the battle for Shaw's liquor, after all. It led to a one-day arrest in 1986 on charges of foreign exchange violations. Never got the company. It was controlled by Manu Chabria until his death in 2005, after which Mr. Mallya took it over. At the same time, for 10 years, having invited Manu Chabria's brother Kishore Chabria to come into Herbertsons, he fought a battle with him. That also finally, I have written endless articles about it in the 90s. It came under his control in 2005. Kingfisher Airlines was happening at the same time. So it was set up in 2003, began operations in 2005. It was modeled on Virgin Atlantic with Mallya as a brand ambassador, exactly like that company. It exuded glamour. And if you ask me, Mr. Mallya had no shortage of glamour in his life, but perhaps the thrill of owning an airline far bigger than owning absolutely super prime property around the world, fleet of vintage cars, race horses, yachts, private jets, what have you. He had everything, but he obviously thought the airline was bigger glamour, bigger clout, whatever. He put his heart and soul into it with disastrous results. The glamour quickly became disconnected from financial reality, made a series of bad business decisions from which he did not recover. One of these was, of course, the ill advised acquisition of Air Deccan just to get international flying rights. It added to the financial burden, and he can't control things that are not in his control. Oil prices rose, revenue stagnated, debt ballooned, and you had a disaster. Couldn't pay salaries. Mr. Mallya is attempting to spin this failure into martyrdom, which seems audacious, but is understanding. After all, India's regulatory system has indeed been selective about who it chases about bankruptcy. The politically connected and equally extravagant Anil Ambani, who had told the UK courts that his net worth was zero, is treated so differently. His Reliance Communications alone has defaulted on debt of 47,000 crore, and the recovery is a pittance. This is just one of many companies where they finally were sold at a song as compared to the debt they had and left huge losses for people. He has gone on to sign a deal with Dassault to manufacture Falcon 2000 jets. Then there is Aircel, owned by Sivasankaran. The recovery was less than 5%. Any action? No. They didn't try to say jailing them is subjective. In fact, many other fugitive industrialists, the Sandesra brothers, sitting in Nigeria with a thriving oil business, no one's going after them. No one is saying return the money with interest as they have recovered from Mr. Mallya. Not part of the money. They all want to make a settlement, but if you recovered it from Mr. Vijay Mallya, you can recover it from the Sandesra brothers who are doing extremely well. Oil is booming, but they have not faced similar scrutiny or legal pursuit. Indeed, India's bankruptcy law has recovered more from Mr. Mallya than any other defaulter, and I've said this before. By targeting him disproportionately, the government has enabled him to portray himself as a victim. I'm not a criminal, he says in the podcast. I created jobs, built brands, and offered to pay back every penny I could, and it's all correct. You cannot single out one person for different treatment. Now, just creating jobs may not be true. There is all the unsavory side that I talked about. He was extravagant. There have been write-offs. There has been a bailout. But the rule of law, when applied unevenly, allows even the most implausible narratives to begin to resonate with people. These are young people who don't know the past. They're the ones who are watching these podcasts and look at Mr. Mallya as a hero. So it's possible that Mr. Mallya may never return to India and stand trial, though he says he's willing to if it is fair. But his latest reinvention as a misunderstood patriot rather than a rogue industrialist, I think is going to succeed. And for that, it is the state's ham-handed actions alone that are responsible. If you agree, please spread the word, subscribe to this, and share it. Thank you.